Hello, thank you so much for joining us today for Ask a Librarian Live Science Edition. I'm Gabriella Kahn from the Smithsonian Libraries Advancement Team, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to our program. We hope that everything will go as smoothly as possible, but just in case there are any hiccups, please bear with us. We're recording the program so that we can share it with those who weren't able to join us today or if there are any technical issues. And just like so many of you, our speakers today are at home with their families and pets, so please excuse any potential background sounds or surprise visitors. Now, think back to a time when you were in school and you had a research project to complete. Where would you go to test and expand your knowledge, to make sense of your topic, and find authentic answers? The answer is, of course, the library. And while researchers and scientists at the Smithsonian aren't in school, they're still searching for knowledge, finding answers, and widening our understanding of the world. And to do this, they rely on us, the Smithsonian Libraries. We are the heart of America's great national treasure, helping to power the increase and diffusion of knowledge. So today, we want to share with you how our librarians support science and scientists at the Smithsonian and around the world, and how they've been able to quickly adapt to this new fully online environment, thanks to their skills and expertise, as well as support from our generous donors that has allowed us to be nimble and purchase crucial resources during this time. So the Smithsonian Libraries has 8 branches that focus exclusively on the natural and physical sciences. We have the National Museum of Natural History Library, the Joseph F. Coleman III Library of Natural History, which holds our collection of rare books in anthropology and the natural sciences, the John Wesley Powell Library of Anthropology, the Botany and Horticulture Library, the Museum Support Center Library in Suitland, Maryland, the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center Library in Edgewater, Maryland, the National Zoological Park and Conservation Biology Institute Library in both Washington, D.C. and in Front Royal, Virginia, and the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute Library in Panama. And if that weren't enough, we also have a number of divisional libraries under the Natural History Library umbrella, and they support their respective divisions at the Natural History Museum, such as the Entomology Library or the Invertebrate Zoology Library. And you'll be hearing a lot more about some of these branches and one of these divisional libraries in just a little bit. So with that, I would like our wonderful librarians to please introduce themselves. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Bonnie.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Feltz, and I started at the Smithsonian Libraries in May 2012 as a library technician. I work with the Museum Studies Research Library, the Vertebrate Paleontology Library, and the National Museum of Natural History Main Library. My background before coming to the Smithsonian was in archives. I received my Bachelor of Arts in Fine Arts and Clarinet Performance from the University of Maryland, an Associate's in Computer Science, and I finished my Master's of Science in Library Science at Clarion University of Pennsylvania with a concentration in Archives and Records Management.
Thanks, Bonnie. And Stephen.
Hi, my name is Stephen Cox. I am the National Zoological Park and Conservation Biology Institute Librarian. I'm the Mineral Sciences Librarian for the National Museum of Natural History, and occasionally I sit in as a reference librarian at the Natural History Library. I previously was a university librarian, a federal contracting librarian, a corporate librarian, and a public librarian. Might have said that twice. I went to Vanderbilt University, where I have earned a degree in English literature with an emphasis on modern British fiction, and my master in library and information science is from Kent State University.
Thanks, Stephen. Carrie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Smith. I am the branch manager of the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute Library in Panama. I've worked with the Smithsonian Libraries for 7 years. Before coming to Panama, I worked at the Museum Support Center Library and did various collections projects at Air and Space, American History, and the American Indian Libraries. Before Smithsonian, I worked at the Folger Shakespeare Library cataloging rare books and at the NOAA Central Library managing government documents. I have a master's degree in library science with a specialization in rare books from Indiana University, and I studied the history of art and architecture and French language, which go well in Panama, from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio.
Thanks, Carrie. And Ricardo.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Ricardo Beteta. I'm a library technician that deals with cataloging, reference, and serials at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute Library. Before coming to STRI, I worked for the Social Work Library at Columbia University in New York, and also worked for Barnes and Nobles for 4 years before coming to Panama, and I have been here for 34 years.
Thanks, Ricardo. So thank you all. And we have a first question of the evening for Stephen. So Stephen, can you tell us what might a typical day look for a zoo librarian before this pandemic and now?
Okay, sure. So before the pandemic, my day started by getting off the metro at Cleveland Park and walking to the Connecticut Avenue entrance. My branch is embedded within the vet hospital, so because it's not on main campus, it's better for me to see my patrons where they are. So I typically walk down Olmsted, which is the main route through the zoo, stopping at the visitor center to talk to the admin staff or communication staff, stopping by the animal houses to meet with the curators and the keepers, catch a glimpse of the Bennett wallabies or the Jeffrey marmosets. From going to Olmsted and then getting off to main campus at the vet hospital, I can maintain my collection. I do what a normal librarian would do. I check books in, I put them back where they belong. I touch base with the vet staff, the pathology staff, make sure that everyone has what they need. I spend most of my time at the zoo around other people, so I don't get a lot of office work done. That mainly takes place at the National Museum of Natural History. So after being at the zoo for a few hours, I might jump on the metro, take it down to Natural History, where I have an office as well as being the Mineral Sciences librarian. The Mineral Sciences staff usually uses me more for article retrieval than research. And I'll talk a little bit about my research as a zoo librarian. I also sit in occasionally as a reference librarian at the NH Library, which is something that my other colleagues who have their own collections do as well. On Fridays, I have a respite from the office life and I drive to Front Royal, Virginia. It's a round trip of 160 miles from where I live. I'm embedded in an office that actually is the living room of a house. So it's a very comfortable day. I might walk around campus speaking to some of the keepers and the curators. I spend a lot of time with vet staff when I'm there, shelving books again, or I would say that I get a lot of reference requests just from having interpersonal conversations with the people that work there that I wouldn't normally engender if I were to just call them on the phone or email them. Since the pandemic started, I have spent a lot of time working with the COVID-19 reopening task force and the risk assessment group, as well as building a COVID-19 citation database. So my background before coming to the Smithsonian, I was a university librarian at Miami University where Carrie went. I was also a federal contracting librarian at NIOSH and CDC where I worked on literature and systematic reviews. So I'm used to working in giant citation databases, curating citations, building keywords and folders. And I thought that would be the best way I could support the people who are making the decisions to keep Smithsonian staffers and visitors safe. But let's go back a little bit and talk about what I do both before and during the pandemic, which is working on literature searches. Gabi has pulled up some pictures for you. This is a varanid. Varanid is a monitor lizard. Komodo dragons are also varanid. I worked with a Smithsonian vet medical officer and an intern on research about female reproductive infective disease, which when joined with peers from 6 other institutions has created a presentation that we're giving at AZA, which is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, as well as the potential for a scholarly article. Next slide, please. Another type of aranid. Next slide. Prehensile-tailed porcupines. So I think this is Quilber. He's one of our babies. I had a really interesting question from a keeper about whether or not prehensile-tailed porcupines were hearing sensitive, and the reason being that Quilber and his father both exhibited nervousness around a water hose being sprayed within their enclosure, which is normal. Keepers clean out enclosures. So I ran the research and discovered that there was no literature on hearing sensitivity in prehensile-tailed porcupines. And the reason that's important is it means that there's now an opportunity for the keeper to create original research, which is one of the things the Smithsonian is so good at doing. Next slide, please. A common question for certain types of mammals is whether or not they experience and to what degree they experience pseudopregnancy. These are pinnipeds, so we have seals and sea lions both at the zoo, and the research shows that pseudopregnancy is not that uncommon. Pseudopregnancy is often a mammal's way of finding out whether, the body's way of telling the mammal whether or not they can carry a baby to term. Next slide, please. I've also done that research on river otters. Fun fact, river otters are very, very cute, but they are not sweet. You've seen videos of them swimming around people in Canada. Do not go swimming around river otters. Small clawed Asian otters, on the other hand, super cute, much safer. Next slide, please. This is Pip the kiwi. He's an ambassador animal. I've done a lot of behavioral research on kiwis and enclosure and environmental research for them to figure out what might be best for an enclosure, how kiwis might deal with reproduction. They're also ambassador animals, which leads me into the next slide and telling you more about my work with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. As you would expect, the National Zoo has premier curators, which are normally called head keepers at other zoos, but because the animals are a living collection and we are a museum, they're called curators. Orangutans are one of the species that I handle the bibliography for the species survival plan, which is like a dating service for animals. It's how keepers from different zoos match up animals using genetic diversity and temperament to make sure that the breeding can be successful. The bibliography that I create is curated papers, books, and book chapters about husbandry, dentition, tool use, and of course breeding. An ongoing search that I'm working on now is Chad ungulates and diseases. Ungulates being like oryxes or deer. We're reintroducing oryxes into the wild in Africa, and we want to make sure that there are no diseases that they might catch that could hurt them, and if there are, what we can do to mitigate that. And that is a normal day at the National Zoo.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I am so jealous that you get to go out to the Conservation Biology Institute on a regular basis. That is one of my favorite places across the Smithsonian. So obviously, electronic resources like the ones that Stephen searches for for these literature searches, like journals, and then ebooks and digitized books have been, really indispensable during this pandemic. But providing these resources has actually been a vital part of how the library supports research that goes on both at the Smithsonian and around the world well before the pandemic. So Bonnie, can you please tell us about the recent project that you worked on to share digitized content with the worldwide paleontology community?
Yes, so as I shared earlier, part of my role at the Smithsonian Libraries is to oversee the Vertebrate Paleontology Library in the National Museum of Natural History. And as Gabi said today, I want to share with you a project we just completed to digitize content from a collection for access to the worldwide researcher community. The Vertebrate Paleontology Library, pictured here, holds more than 1,800 specialized volumes focusing on physical geography, stratigraphy, and systematic paleontology of the Mesozoic, Tertiary, and Quaternary periods. It is one of the most comprehensive vertebrate paleontology literature collections in the world. The primary users are the Natural History Department of Paleobiology researchers and curators. Although much of the collection is very technical, we also have books aimed at non-scientists to assist with the education programs at the Natural History Museum. We also select paleoart books, which use scientific evidence to give us a visual depiction of what prehistoric life was like when fossilized remains were alive. The Natural History branch has been very busy with the launch of this new library collection to coincide with the Natural History Museum's new David H. Cook Hall of Fossils, which was opening in the summer of 2019 after being closed for 5 years for renovation. We wanted to help support and celebrate this achievement by providing access to this literature in a collection that the public and researchers could access without visiting our library in person. Little did we know that this, less than a year later, no one would be able to visit our library in person, and all essential for researchers. So in order to provide this access, we work with Smithsonian Libraries, digitization staff, and the Biodiversity Heritage Library to create a special collection on the Biodiversity Heritage Library website that feature the best digitized literature available from our collection. We named it Unearthed, a digital dig into the Smithsonian Library's paleobiology collection. Now, you might be wondering, what is the Biodiversity Heritage Library, aka BHL? It's the world's largest open access digital library for biodiversity, available free worldwide. Scanned materials are contributed by member libraries from many different countries, and the Smithsonian is the headquarters. The aim is to put together the world's collective information on our world's changing ecosystems and varieties of species that a single library could never hold. Due to copyright restrictions, libraries can only scan materials published after 1924 and whatever publications that we can specifically get permission from the publishers to scan. Of course, BHL and our other digitized collections have been incredibly useful to the researchers during this pandemic when physical libraries have been closed. You can see here, this is a plate from the Mastodon giganteus of North America, which is scanned and available on BHL. Within the Unearthed collections, we have 542 volumes from 391 titles containing 197,374 pages. So the topics include general paleobiology, prehistoric animals, dinosaurs, fossils, and prehistoric insects. That's just to name a few. I did find one volume in BHL that was scanned from our Coleman Library that was from 1736, but there might be some books from even earlier. The old and rare books that tend to be fragile are often not available to be circulated or regularly handled, so digitizing them allows researchers from all over the world to access them. Staff from our Department of Paleobiology were so excited about this collection that they chose their favorite scanned book from the Smithsonian Libraries and wrote about it for a series of blog posts. The first blog post was written by Hans Seuss, who's pictured on the left, who is the senior research geologist and curator of vertebrate paleontology. He highlighted the release of the Smithsonian contributions to paleobiology, which had just been uploaded to BHL. He's also a big fan of cats, if you like cats. On the right is Ryan Haupt. He's a postdoc researcher who studies extinct and still living sloths, and he's hanging out with the giant sloth. The blog posts were released about once a month, including posts by me and one of our Coleman librarians. Another Paleo Department staff member, Michelle Pensdorf, as a paleontologist and a preparator of fossil vertebrates, which means that she builds the specimens that you see on display. She submitted a blog post highlighting a book that helped her prepare this fossil cast of Ceratosaurus nasicornis in the picture that she was working on for the new fossil hall. She quoted, "The digitization of Gilmore's publication allowed for me to quickly reference it from our workstation, my home computer, even on my phone, and the physical copy is also close at hand in the Natural History Museum itself, for when I need that kind of inspiration that comes with smelling old paper and seeing neat rows of bindings." As a culmination of our Unearthed project, we created a virtual Adopt a Book event that highlighted about 20 of our favorite Smithsonian Libraries books from the online collections. Some needed restoration, whereas the adoptions for others would help the Vertebrate Paleontology and Coleman Libraries purchase new books for our collections and bolster our support for scientific research at the Smithsonian and around the world. Here I am at one of our in-person Adopt a Book events. The book to the right is one of the books available to adopt for conservation work. It's titled Descriptive Catalogue of Marine Reptiles of the Oxford Clay by the British Museum of Natural History. This is volume part 1 of 2 and was given to the Smithsonian in 1910, right after it was published by the Board of Trustees of the British Museum. Inside the front cover of each of the 2 books is a plate stating that it was presented by the trustees of the British Museum and that it was number 23 of 25 copies.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. So as Bonnie said, it's with the funds from Adopt Book that we're able to preserve our books that need a little TLC, to buy new books to support research and discovery, and to digitize books to provide access. And we are just so grateful for all of our Adopt a Book donors. And I know some of them are joining us today, so thank you. So Carrie and Ricardo, I am just thrilled that you're joining us all the way from Panama today. And you know, many people don't know that the Smithsonian has a tropical research institute in Panama, which is called STRI. And even fewer are aware of our incredible library there, which supports STRI research, publications, education, exhibitions, and public programming, as well as those of other museums and research centers in Panama and across Central America. So I am just, like I said, so thrilled to have you here to tell us more about your library.
Thanks, Gabi. Thank you for having us today. And that's really amazing to hear about Bonnie and Stephen's work as well. So we learn something about our colleagues' work every time we do an event like this. So you can see here, this is the Earl Silas Tupper Library in Tropical Biology, based in Panama City. This is the only branch of the Smithsonian Libraries that is based outside of the United States, and it is the most complete collection of tropical biology in Central America. The beautiful library photographed here, our campus is just a dream to walk around the tropical plants, and there's a beautiful mosaic on the outside of the annex, which houses 3 floors of print collections, mostly books and journals, but as well we have over 1,000 maps. We have a vertical file and a special collection, which will soon include an archival element to the library. The collection of print and electronic resources covers STRI research involving tropical diversity and its origins, marine ecology and evolution, ecology and physiology of tropical forests, behavior and adaptive evolution, archaeology, anthropology, and paleo and human ecology. So at the library, we're a team of 6 staff members who work to offer bilingual research services, outreach and orientations to STRI and visiting researchers, and then caring as well for the 3 floors of print journals, maps, and the special collection. Gabi, do you have the second slide? So here we have an image of the 13 facilities that STRI conducts research across the country of Panama. And the library, like I said, is based at the mouth of the canal at Panama City, which is on the Pacific side. The STRI library supports STRI's permanent scientific staff, as well as more than 1,000 visiting scientists in a normal year. This year, it's been a little different since March with telework and the pandemic. And the library has been working to quickly adapt to figure out how we can support their research over telework, which is also part of the larger Smithsonian Libraries initiatives to support our scientists. In the next slide, Ricardo will speak about his many years of service in the library and how library service to patrons has changed over the years.
Good afternoon again. When I started working at the Straw Library, the only tools that we had available was the card catalog, which was very difficult to use then, as it is now, in order to find information. And we also had a big clunky machine, a microfiche reader that made a lot of noise, so that we could search for subject matters with the catalog. And that was basically to help find books, monographs in the collection. But if you wanted to find information on the journals, we needed to use biological abstracts and zoological records, which took a lot of time to teach people how to use them. And I can remember the amount of research assistants who came to the library to search for information for our scientists and bringing down hundreds of these heavy bound volumes and leaving them on the tables. And it took about us 2 or 3 hours just to get them back on the shelves. And this was every day. And I also remember when the Smithsonian wanted to have connectivity to Stroy Library, how we bought the computers, and every time there was a rainstorm or thunderstorm, we would have to run and turn the computers off so they could not be burned by electricity. So we could just wait it out until the storm passes, then we could go back on the catalog. I tell these things to Carrie, and she smiles. It's like I'm talking about Asian history, but this is part of the commitments the Smithsonian has to excellence, to research, that always move forward to provide the best service to our scientists and to our main public. It's sad to see how we used to have at least 600 to 700 people every day. I mean, not every day, every month attend to the library. Now those days are gone, but we know that the library collection is being heavily used by the internet, and makes it more available to the public worldwide, which is more important. So
Yeah.
that's
No,
what I was like to say.
thank you, Ricardo. I mean, you're absolutely right about the differences that in the library, we do not see the amount of physical visitors because so much is now available electronically, whether it's the card catalog, which we can see in this image, the image of the electronic library catalog at the top versus the old printed and typed catalog, which resides in our special collection, as well as but the expertise of the staff, whether it was teaching how to use biological abstracts, which we'll see in the next slide, in person versus how to use the electronic database now. It's a shift in skills, which the library does very well for the researchers. At the bottom of this image is the original print-based library on Barro, Colorado Island, where Smithsonian scientists first conducted research in Panama in the 1920s. At this facility, they would bring their field guides and their research manuals to the island, and that became the basis for the current Stry Library's print collections. In the past 3 years, the Stry Library has transitioned in close coordination with our Smithsonian Libraries branches, particularly the natural and physical science collections, to acquire more electronic books versus print so that we could have wider access across Panama, across the United States, internationally, for Stry and its facilities and the rest of the Smithsonian researchers. And over the past few months, during the pandemic, the Stry Libraries created virtual Spanish language learning opportunities for Smithsonian researchers. We've been teaching orientations, how to use the library's resources during telework, which has been an amazing addition to some of the outreach that we offer. Next slide. Gabi, is my camera on?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, everyone, just a little break into the normal business. So this is the Biologia Centrale Americana. It's one of the most prized collections in the Stry Library. And these volumes that you see in the photograph on the right originated on BCI in the 20s. It was the only complete collection of the BCA that was in Central America. And over the course of the 20th century, researchers would travel to the Stry Library to use this reference resource. On the left, you'll see a digitized version of it through the Biodiversity Heritage Library. In the early 2000s, the Smithsonian Libraries, which helped to create the BHL, had, as I understand it, this was one of the first fully digitized series that BHL completed. And now this series is available free and open to the public. So it's kind of wonderful to see that dichotomy of we care for the collection in the actual library and we continue to bring it out, and the chromolithograph plates are gorgeous, but UI and everybody else can get online and access the entire contents of the volumes anytime. Next slide, please. Another key aspect that the Stry Library does to support Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute is capturing scientific research and help to maintain what we call the Stry bibliography, which is research output and data set citations. This work is accomplished in coordination with our Smithsonian Libraries digital programs and initiatives colleagues who manage the Smithsonian Research Online for all Smithsonian research. This screen capture shows over 14,000 citations that reside in SRO of Stry research, some of which is open access for the public to read. Next slide. So we're going to wrap up about the Stry Library and its unique status in Panama and within Smithsonian. The library has provided service and adapted to many changes since beginning researchers in Panama in the early 20th century, who we show on the left this group of gentlemen researchers, including James Zetek, the first director of Stry Canal Zone Biological Area. It wasn't Stry yet in the 20s. And on the right is our current acting director, Dr. Ori Senhor, who is the first Panamanian and the first female director of the Institute. And this is just a perfect example of Stry moving forward, Smithsonian moving forward, how the Stry Library can support both in nimbly adapting to 21st century research, to providing access and research services to Stry researchers and affiliates, as well as helping to train the next generation of Panamanian biologists.
Thank you so much, Carrie and Ricardo. I just have to say that visiting Stry and the library there and learning about the research that goes on and how the library supports it, it was just such an incredible experience that I was lucky to have. And well, and not just because of all the sloths that I saw while I was there, but you know, the staggering amount of biodiversity on what is, you know, such a relatively small amount of land is just, it's really hard to grasp. And you know, the number of different research topics that are investigated at Stry and that are covered in the library's collections are just astounding. So thank you again for sharing. And now I want to bring all of our speakers back so that we can open it up for our audience questions. So again, if you have any questions for our speakers, please go ahead and submit them using the Q&A feature. We have first one right here. So I think this is a great one to start with, going back to the beginning of our presentation this evening. This person says, it sounds like none of you have a traditional science background. As a current MLS student who is interested in science librarianship, how did you come to work within the Smithsonian Science Libraries?
Well, I can start. I took Latin for a long time, and so when I was working in a public library, I was given an opportunity to work as a contractor in a private library on medical device research, and that's when I fell into science librarianship.
I can speak to being very fortunate, right place, right time in 2008, coming to Washington, D.C. I found a full-time permanent job at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Library. I'd never studied government documents. I'd never studied science, and it was hit the ground running, and you learn your collection through maintenance of the collection, working with your colleagues and the staff that you serve. And there's just kind of this dedication to learning the topics so that you can speak to them.
I had an interest in wildlife and animals in high school. Trying to decide what I was going to major in college, I was like, I want to be a marine microbiologist, because obviously that would have been a really good major to have back then. But of course, it didn't follow that path. And so I think like my love for nature and everything, and then my ability to be able to learn things on the fly, and just being a librarian and taking, you know, courses on how to do research and how to find things, I think that definitely helped me get into this position.
Ricardo, do you have anything you want to add? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
I just basically felt lucky that after arriving to Panama for 4 months, I got a job at the Smithsonian because of my English, you know, and even though I was not the first candidate, things turned around. I did get the job, so I was really happy to have work.
So another great question, maybe a tough question, is what would you consider to be the top 1 to 3 challenges for Smithsonian libraries, and why?
It has to be
Anyone. If
anyone.
yeah, we can start with you, Ricardo, if you have anything you want to share.
The top challenge is just keeping current, moving forward with technology, and be aware of the needs of our patrons and meet their needs. That's basically what we need to do. The profession has changed so much, and we also need to change our minds on a lot of things. And it's just, you know, move with the times. Things have changed so much, and we need to move forward with those changes.
Yeah, I agree. Which even harkens back to the question about how did any of us end up in a scientific library career, and it's also continuing education, which is a lot of which is self-motivated. But the question itself is asking about challenges to the Smithsonian libraries. You know, I think that we've adapted very well in the past 6 months with the pandemic. I can't say every, but virtually every branch of the 21 branches has changed from acquiring print books during our annual acquisitions run to meeting the challenge of acquiring electronic books, which gives a more universal access to our researchers, our curators, and then there's the learning curve of how do you access those? How do you use the ebooks? So it's been fun for us to teach each other. We have sessions where we all learn from each other how to use these materials, and then we can speak to the researchers and the curators. And then there will be kind of a forward-looking path how should we spend our acquisitions budgets moving forward? Should it be more print journals, print books? And it's not possible to do that across the board. Not everything is available electronically. There are copyright issues. There's access issues. So it's definitely a learning curve, but an interesting time, super interesting time that we're adapting to.
To piggyback on what Carrie is saying, my researchers at the zoo have been at work. They're not exempted from, they're essential workers. So, but my library is closed and most of the books that they use are physical. So I've had to negotiate with them to determine which books they will accept as e-versions, because a lot of them, especially the vets, are using these books in the surgical theater, whether it's for just a basic there are so many different species at the zoo, and not every vet is an expert in every species, which shouldn't surprise you because they're also lifelong learners. So I have to make sure they have the resources they need in a way that they can use it. I'm fortunate, unlike many of my colleagues, in that most of my research takes place within databases. So I live in databases, whether it's Web of Science or PubMed or ProQuest, and my researchers know that. So getting a question from them at 6 o'clock at night, I can run a search at 8 in the morning and have it an answer for them the next day. But when it comes to ebooks, how it's accessed is a huge issue. Some of them want to be able to use it on a Kindle or another type of e-reader, and the publishers won't allow that. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is it a full HTML book, which means it's in frames, or is it a PDF, which is much easier to use? However, with a PDF, you have to make sure it's got links to full graphic images. So there's another issue, but that's an issue I would think any medical library would have right now.
I also agree with the access to resources. Since a lot of the books in my library tend to be about older science, my users tend to need physical books. Like sometimes the paleo art is early, the plates are in a way that they don't translate well into digital formats. And in some cases that they are scanned, they aren't all scanned into BHL or even the Smithsonian digital libraries. So, and right now it's really hard because my scientists are working from home and they don't have access to the library, so they can't go to the Vertebrate Paleontology Library and find the books that they typically would just leave their office to pick up. I think another loss of access to resources, I mean, we have this problem every year that the publishers raise prices. So trying to keep access to things in just so people can have these resources to do their work. And we do offer interlibrary loan services to our staff, so we can borrow from other institutions, but right now our other institutions are also closed because of the pandemic. So trying to keep up with however we can help people. We had ebooks for the past couple years, but we weren't heavy ebook purchasers until the pandemic, when we had no other choice but to purchase ebooks just to have people have access to these things.
Yeah, thank you all. I think those were great answers, and I will just say that you know, everything that these librarians just discussed is exactly why you know, we do need support from our donors, and that's why we're so grateful to them to allow us to have this ability to be flexible and nimble, and like Bonnie was just saying, to be able to provide access to the researchers who need it. So on the topic of things going on during the pandemic, another question here is, have you had a significant increase in international inquiries associated with the pandemic?
Not with the pandemic in particular, but I have noticed an increase in reference questions from zoos outside the US. And I think that's because they've lost their access to, especially the big European libraries. I've noticed a large increase from Belgium and from South Africa.
Yeah, in Panama, we work with the Panamanian Library Association. We do this regularly, so pre-pandemic, to find local access, particularly to Spanish language and Panamanian literature, but those libraries are also closed. There's a point where we've tried to find the access through interlibrary loan. There are also other subscription sites such as Healthy Trust. There's a point where we try to do a networking loan system, particularly earlier, June, May, before June, when no institutions were open. And if somebody had access to an electronic resource, we might reach out to a colleague. We kind of did what we could, and this was also following with the Internet Archive having the open library. There was a point up to June where there was just a real opening of resources which typically were behind firewalls, and many of them are back behind the firewalls.
So staying on this theme, we have another question that asks, do you foresee any of the changes you've made due to the pandemic becoming permanent? And do you anticipate any ramifications?
I actually can answer this. I think a lot of these things like e-resources and e-books and that kind of thing, making the access more open to our staff and users around the world, is actually part of the Secretary of the Smithsonian's plan for, how did he word it? For better access for education purposes. I know there's a better name for it, I just can't think of it right now. So the library is trying to fit in with the new Secretary's plan of making all these resources available to everybody around the world, trying to make one Smithsonian. That's the name of his plan, is one Smithsonian, that we're trying to really embrace that within the libraries and make us more approachable to the public and to our staff. So I think a lot of these things will continue on in the future.
Anyone else have an answer about that question?
He answered it really well. That's exactly what I would have said.
Great. So another question. So this is for both our STRI librarians and Stephen. Have you seen significant increases in inquiries into climate change and its impact on your staff at your museums and units and their research?
I haven't, and I think it's because maybe the patrons know that we have the Environmental Research Center, CERC, in Edgewater, Maryland, which mostly handles climate change issues more than I would. I think that my peers at other zoos have seen these issues, especially my peers at the San Diego Zoo. But interestingly, most of the inquiries that I get are of a medical, so a veterinary nature when it comes to external questions. Internally, I get questions ranging from how do I use this to this electronic resource to why is my prehensile-tailed porcupine jumping whenever I spray the water hose?
I wish I had that question. I wouldn't know what to say, but that's a lot of fun. For STRI, very similar to what Stephen said, not necessarily the exterior questions from non-Smithsonian colleagues, but we have a data monitoring group at STRI, and they are constantly monitoring Panamanian data, international data. So we get reports and updates internally, and that is also in affiliation with Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. Additionally, I know that some of the research that has been published, because the last 6 months, remember, the scientists and the researchers and the curators have also not been at work. They've been sitting at home with their loved ones and their animals. And a lot of publications have come out in the past 6 months. So I have noticed some of the titles when we enter them into STRI bibliography are climate related.
I actually have literature in the paleo department that has to do with paleoclimatology. So we do have scientists that study prehistoric climate change, and it kind of can give you a futuristic view of how our climate can continue, or hopefully continue.
Please continue.
Yeah, and I know that that's something that researchers at STRI definitely focus on as well, right, Carrie? That's yeah, I know that both at Natural History and STRI they focus on that topic.
Yes.
So another question here from a patron, actually, who did a lot of research for her master's thesis at our Natural History Library. She was looking at 19th century geological surveys in a pre-Google Books world, and she worked with some of our great librarians at the Natural History Library. So that's great. And her question is, before COVID, what were your in-person reference requests like, given the common availability of, pre-1925 material online?
Where do I find this? That's really with mineralogy. So I took over from Martha. I think that was your question. I took over from Martha, who was, I'm going to get a little emotional because she was such a huge mentor. Sorry, but anyway, most of the time it's not that the reference doesn't exist, it's how do you make it findable to someone who is using it. And as amazing as the people at BHL are, you're always going to have a patron who isn't quite certain what terms or to use or not to use, or whether they should truncate them or use a Boolean operator. But I'd say that was, in mineral sciences, that's usually where do I find it, or I can't seem to access it, not does it exist.
Yeah, BHL is an amazing resource with the pre-copyright capabilities and the open access. And we find with our outreach and training, trying to teach people that it exists, how to use it, and then they know to go to it to try to research the biodiverse world.
So another question is about your patron demographics. So what are they? Talking about, are they researchers mainly, curators? Are they mainly people from the Smithsonian, or are they mainly outside researchers? What's sort of the breakdown of your patrons?
I would say the majority of our researchers on a day-to-day basis would be our staff. Like we have the scientists in our building, we have curators, we have fellows, interns. We do have visitors. The libraries are technically open to the public by appointment in some cases. Some are walk-in, depends on the branch. So we deal with all kinds of people, and I know we have people that come from other government agencies to do research with us. So like you have NOAA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife that come do research, and we do have students like master students and PhD students that come and use our collections for their research. I would say one of we haven't had one in a while, but there's some postdoc fellows that would come and do research with the Coleman, and they would actually be in-house doing their research project from the Coleman collections. And that's actually a really cool opportunity for people.
Ricardo, do you want to explain the STRI patrons normally before COVID?
We got a lot of interns, visitors, scientific visitors, research assistants coming to the library and using the collection. At least I saw an increase in the use of the library. People staying more time sitting doing their work at the library. The visitors from Panamanian public does have come down. I don't know why, but because the library has been opened since the beginning to the public. But I also wanted to go back. I don't know if about climate change. I saw I do get not a lot, but an increase in the information on requesting for information on seawater level rise and how it affects native populations, Indian populations, especially Kunas who live on the small archipelago in Panama. How they need to move from the islands and to the mainland, and how has affected their culture and their economy. I do have seen the increase in that, and also seen the Panamanian government has been opening more space for the Canal, and how the change of rain, how is affecting the economic projections of the Panama Canal. I have seen an increase in the demand for information on those particular subjects. So on the patrons, now that we're more open and more permissive, people coming to library with their backpacks, and it's pretty good, having patrons fill the library. Sometimes overwhelm the library with patrons. So this feels really good.
So I have the opposite issue that Ricardo has. No one's allowed in my library. It's because it's in the vet hospital. Because no one's allowed in my library, I have to go to them or track them somehow. So I have a massive spreadsheet. My colleagues know that I love spreadsheets. I have 891 patrons at the zoo and 58 patrons in mineral sciences. Of the 891 patrons, I think something like 200 or 300 are interns at the zoo. So a ton of my questions are, can I get a library card, or how do I use this resource? So I do a lot of trainings. About 30 of them are upper management, and those questions tend to revolve around very high level subject matter, usually a quick turnaround. The curators, building relationships with curators has been incredibly important. So I used to attend, back in the before 4 times, I would attend their staff meetings on Tuesday mornings to learn about animals coming and going, and different research projects they were working on. A lot of postdocs at the zoo, not a lot in mineral sciences. Most of the mineral science professionals are collections researchers, and so my help for them is usually retrieval, more like a gopher.
All right. Well, sadly, our time is up. But I just want to thank all of our speakers one last time. And of course, thank you all for joining us today. And, I just want to again express our gratitude to all of you who tuned in today, and all of our supporters. We can't do what we do without you. And we, as we have talked about this evening, we really rely on your support to help our libraries build the strongest and most accessible collections possible. And the increase in diffusion of knowledge at the Smithsonian really continues to rely on our librarians. And so, we depend on your annual contributions to your favorite branches, or through our Adopt a Book program, to stay as nimble as we can and to provide exactly what researchers need. So we hope you might consider making a donation today or in the coming weeks to support one of our science libraries and allow them to continue to bring knowledge within closer reach of both Smithsonian scientists and the world. So I know there were a couple questions we weren't able to get to, so we will do our best to follow up. But if you have any further questions or comments or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach our whole advancement team at silrsvp@si.edu. And you can also share your thoughts by filling out our short survey, which will come up right after the session ends. And if you're not already subscribed to our email list, please sign up on our website at library.si.edu. It's about halfway down on the homepage. And that's really the best way to stay informed about what we're up to and other special opportunities like this. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope you and yours stay safe. Good night.